There's a certain sound your backyard shouldn't make, like the low, ominous hum of a high-voltage substation firing up 20 feet from your vegetable garden. I had just stepped out that morning, steaming mug in hand, ready to enjoy my usual moment of peace, when I noticed something that nearly made me spill coffee all over my robe. Where there used to be an empty patch of land and a couple of lazy squirrels doing their morning laps, there now stood a steel monstrosity fenced in with padlocked gates, buzzing like a nest of angry bees. And just like that, I knew my week was about to go off the rails. You ever see something so completely out of place that your brain tries to explain it away with something dumb like, maybe it's for a movie shoot? Yeah. That was me. Only this wasn't a movie. This was real. And I was about to find out just how deep the HOA's audacity could go. What they didn't know was, I'm the wrong man to play land games with. Because the moment I found out who put that thing there, I didn't just plan to make them take it down. I planned to make them wish they'd never touched a single inch of my soil. It started, ironically, on a day I was feeling unusually proud of my property. I'd just finished repainting the barn out back, and had planted some raised garden bed. Everything looked sharp, fresh, and mine. I'm not some crusty old recluse, I just like my space. I bought this slice of land 10 years ago, and I've kept it exactly the way I wanted it. Peaceful, clean, and most importantly, outside the iron grip of the HOA that controlled the rest of the neighborhood. My property, due to a lovely quirk of zoning history, wasn't technically part of their jurisdiction. And believe me, that's a freedom I guarded like a dragon hoarding gold. So imagine my reaction when I walked around my barn and saw a fresh gravel path, a chain-link fence, and, oh yeah, a brand-new utility substation complete with warning signs, transformer boxes, and enough cable to power a football stadium. At first, I thought maybe the county had done something without alerting me, but that theory went out the window the moment I spotted a little laminated sign zip-tied to the fence that read, Community Grid Enhancement Project in partnership with Ridgewood HOA. My jaw could have hit the soil. The Ridgewood HOA? On my land? That's like waking up to find your ex has redecorated your house while you slept. Still half asleep and confused, I walked over to my neighbor Larry's place to see if he knew anything. Larry's a good guy, mid-60s, runs a barbecue catering side hustle, and definitely not the type to miss something as big as a substation springing up overnight. Sure enough, he squinted at me like I was nuts. Didn't they tell you? He asked. Karen said she cleared it with the board. Thought it was all arranged. I asked who Karen was talking about. Larry shrugged. Some approval from one of the trustees or something. Said it was all handled. That didn't make sense. There was no trustee who could give them that kind of access. The land was mine, and I sure as hell didn't sign off on it. That's when my stomach dropped. They didn't just go around me. They didn't even think they needed to ask. I marched straight back to my house and dug out every document I had, property deed, title insurance, even an old plat map from the county clerk's office. All of them said the same thing. I was the sole and absolute owner of every inch of that lot. No easements, no shared access, nothing. Which meant that not only did the HOA build on my property without permission, they did it illegally. My anger was simmering, but I decided to give them one shot to explain themselves before going full scorched earth. I went to the Ridgewood HOA office later that afternoon. It was one of those overly air-conditioned, beige-carpeted hellholes where passive-aggressive flyers lived and died. There she was, the queen herself, Karen Whitmore, HOA president and local tyrant. She was in the middle of typing up a noise violation when I knocked on the glass. She smiled that customer service smile predators use before they strike. "Jack, hi. What brings you in today?" she chirped, as if she hadn't just committed land fraud in broad daylight. "I'd like to talk about the substation," I said. Her smile twitched. "Oh, the Community Energy Initiative? Isn't it wonderful? It'll reduce outages and lower rates for everyone." I leaned in slightly. "You built it on my property." She blinked once. "Oh, was that yours?" "Yes, it was. Still is. And I never signed off on anything. Her smile evaporated. Well, I'm sure someone from the planning committee spoke with you, maybe verbally? I mean, you're a community-minded person, aren't you? I could not believe what I was hearing. Verbal permission doesn't grant construction right. That's not how property law works. Karen's tone shifted. Let's not get hostile. We all benefit from this. I'm sure we can work something out. I left before I said something that would get me arrested, but as I turned to leave, I saw a stack of flyers on her desk that read, Ridgewood HOA, powering a greener tomorrow. They had already planned a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The arrogance of it was staggering. Back at home, I paced for a while, trying to figure out what to do next. I could file a complaint, sure. But that would take time, and knowing the HOA, they'd lawyer up and stall. Then I remembered something. A few years ago, when a telecom company tried to install a tower near my property, I'd worked with a real estate attorney named Gloria Mendez. Gloria was not subtle. Her nickname in legal circles was the Guillotine. If anyone could chop the HOA's nonsense off at the knees, it was her. I gave her a call. When I told her what had happened, there was a long pause. Then she said, Jack, I'm gonna cancel my weekend plans. This is too good to miss. That was the moment everything shifted. Because now, this wasn't just about a fence or a few power boxes. This was war. And I had just recruited my general. What the HOA didn't realize was that in their rush to save a few bucks and look good in a newsletter, they'd picked a fight with the only guy in the neighborhood who knew exactly how to hit them where it hurt. Legally, publicly, and financially. This wasn't going to end with just an apology. No, I was going to make sure they never forgot whose land they stepped on. Gloria didn't waste a second. By the time I emailed her the deed, parcel map, and a few photos of the substation, she had already drafted a cease and desist letter with all the grace of a wrecking ball. It read like a declaration of war dressed up in legalese, firm, precise, and absolutely brutal. I printed out 3 copies, one for the HOA, one for my records, and one I slapped onto the substation fence with industrial tape. If they were going to ignore my property rights, I figured they might at least read the fine print while their transformers hummed. The next morning, I watched from my porch as a couple of HOA board members skulked up to the fence. One of them, wearing a Ridgewood HOA polo shirt tucked into cargo shorts, ripped the paper off the gate and crumpled it up like it was a pizza flyer. The other was talking rapidly on a cell phone. I knew exactly who he was calling. Sure enough, not 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Caller ID, HOA Karen. I let it go to voicemail. Let them sweat. I forwarded the footage of them trespassing again to Gloria. She responded within 5 minutes. Good. Let's make it a pattern. Gloria's strategy was simple but devastating. First, we document every single breach. Movement on the land, construction crews coming back, any indication they were ignoring the legal notice. Then we'd file an emergency injunction to halt operations, followed by a civil lawsuit for trespass, unlawful occupation, and property damage. And just to be thorough, we'd loop in the county zoning board and the utility commission. If the HOA thought this was just a slap on the wrist, they were about to discover the full extent of municipal hell. Meanwhile, the HOA was ramping up the drama. I started receiving letters in my mailbox, official-looking violations accusing me of all sorts of nonsense, an unsightly shed that had been there for years, unauthorized fencing, and my personal favorite, aggressive garden gnome placement. It was ridiculous, especially since I wasn't even part of their association. They were just flailing, trying to discredit me, and it wasn't working. In fact, my neighbors started to notice. A few came by asking what was going on. I showed them the substation and the papers. Their jaws dropped. Most of them didn't even realize the thing had been built so quickly or that it was on my land. Larry, bless him, stood by me. He told me that Karen had been unusually smug during the last HOA meeting, bragging about a major infrastructure win, and how some people would thank her once they understood the benefits. She'd even hinted that Ridgewood might eventually annex my property, for the good of the neighborhood. That last part set me off. Annex? What did she think this was, risk? As Gloria prepared the formal injunction, I went to work protecting my property. I posted fresh no trespassing signs every 10 feet. I installed motion sensor lights along the substation fence and added 3 cameras with live cloud backup. If a squirrel sneezed near that transformer, I'd know about it. Then, just for fun, I added a sign at the end of my driveway that read, "Smile. You're on camera and trespassing." HOA board members started giving my house a wide berth, as if being caught in a legal spotlight might give them hives. But Karen wasn't finished. Her next move was the most pathetic yet. She sent a courier to my house with a manila envelope labeled Good Faith Agreement. Inside was a handwritten letter offering to rent the substation plot for $100 a year, citing community unity and green living initiatives. It ended with a clause stating that by accepting the offer, I would agree to permanent easement rights for Ridgewood HOA and waive any current or future legal action. I laughed so hard I nearly choked. Gloria's response was even better. She faxed back a notarized rejection stapled to a copy of the state's statute on land seizure. Karen never tried that route again. While Gloria filed our injunction and prepared the lawsuit, I started doing some digging of my own. I visited the county assessor's office and the zoning board. It took a few hours of coffee and charm, but I eventually got my hands on Ridgewood's permit filings. That's when I found it, the smoking gun. The document that supposedly granted permission to build on my lot was signed not by me, but by someone named J.R. Daniels. Problem is, that's not my name. And according to the signature, it had been scrawled with what looked like a crayon held between someone's toes. Forged plain and simple. I brought it to Gloria, and her eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. "They are so screwed," she whispered. The best part? I wasn't the only one they'd done this to. Turns out, 2 streets over, the HOA had paved part of a walking trail across a homeowner's boundary line without his consent. He hadn't pursued it because he didn't want the hassle. But now, seeing what I was doing, he called me up and said, "If you're going nuclear, I'll bring the fuel." With our injunction filed, the court date set, and more evidence stacking up than they could shovel away, Karen made one last desperate play. She showed up at my door, unannounced, in a lavender pantsuit that screamed optics, and carrying a folder labeled mediation proposal. She smiled that same tight-lipped Karen smile and launched into a speech about cooperation over conflict, and how the HOA just wanted to move forward peacefully. I let her talk for 3 minutes before cutting in. "You're not getting the land," I said. "You built on my property without permission, forged a document, and doubled down when you got caught." She blinked rapidly. "Jack, this isn't personal." "It is now," I replied. "I'm not just evicting the substation. I'm selling that plot to your biggest competitor. And I hope they install neon lights and a windmill just to piss you off." That was the end of that. As she walked away, heels clicking on my gravel driveway like a metronome of failure, I realized something. This wasn't just about property or power lines or a humming box behind my barn. It was about the principle. They thought they could take what they wanted, wrap it in corporate jargon, and bulldoze anyone who said no. But not this time. This time, they picked the wrong guy with the wrong land at the wrong time. And now, I had every intention of turning their little land grab into a public disaster they'd never recover from. With the injunction in place and the HOA officially barred from stepping foot on my property, you'd think the dust would settle, but no, this story was just getting warmed up. See, when you deal with people like Karen and her band of clipboard warriors, they don't retreat gracefully. They regroup, rebrand, and try to spin the narrative. Within 2 days, the Ridgewood HOA had published a newsletter calling the substation a temporary fixture meant to benefit the entire neighborhood, including unaffiliated properties. I almost choked on my sandwich reading that. It wasn't just misleading, It was a bold-faced lie dressed up in soft fonts and pastel bullet points. But that didn't bother me as much as what came next. A neighbor forwarded me a copy of an email chain where Karen was rallying support to petition the county to reclassify the land as public utility space. In other words, they weren't done trying to take it from me. They were just planning to make it legal after the fact. But the thing about people who play dirty is they often miss what's right in front of them. And what they missed, in this case, was one very important document Gloria dug up while double-checking the property's zoning status. An ancient but still valid clause tucked into an old development plan, one that had been overlooked during every HOA expansion and land dispute. According to this dusty little gem, my property had been marked with commercial use potential due to a clerical error in the county's land allotment records. An error that was never corrected because, well, nobody cared. Until now. I sat there staring at that paper for a long time. Commercial use. My wheels started turning. If I could legally lease my land to a business, any business, I could turn this entire ordeal into more than just revenge. I could make it a spectacle. That's when I remembered Voltage Valley Co-op, the independent utility company that operated just outside the Ridgewood perimeter. They weren't just competitors to the HOA's contracted energy provider, they were their sworn enemies. Years ago, Ridgewood rejected a proposal from Voltage Valley to supply power at reduced rate. Karen had spun the deal as too unstable, too alternative. In reality, she just didn't like giving up control. Ridgewood signed a 15-year contract with a more expensive provider, locking in inflated rates and leaving a bitter taste with half the community. Voltage Valley never forgot that snub. So I gave them a call. To say they were interested would be an understatement. I didn't even get through the full story before the executive on the line, some guy named Evan, practically leaped through the phone with enthusiasm. When I told him that not only did I have commercial zoning but also a substation already built and ready for use, he asked if I'd be willing to meet in person that afternoon. I said yes, of course, and spent the next hour cutting the grass and trimming hedges like I was hosting royalty. Evan showed up in a sleek electric SUV, dressed in business casual with a clipboard and a grin that said he smelled opportunity. He toured the site, asked a bunch of questions about square footage, voltage specs, land boundaries, and by the time he circled back to me, his grin had grown 3 sizes. "Jack," he said, "this is perfect. You've got infrastructure, visibility, legal leverage, and most importantly, you're in their backyard. We would love to set up a demo grid here. We'll install battery banks, solar panels, and maybe even a microgrid hub. It'll be a symbol. A clean, efficient, non-HOA-approved power source." I nearly offered him a handshake right then, but Gloria reminded me to stay smart. "Make them bid," she whispered later. "You've got a dozen companies who'd kill for this kind of exposure. Turn their mess into a gold mine." And that's exactly what I planned to do. The very next day, I posted a discreet but very clear announcement online and through local business channels. Privately owned commercial lot with infrastructure available for lease. All inquiries welcome. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. Within 48 hours, I had 8 offers from companies ranging from solar startups to a tech firm that wanted to install an AI-powered smart grid test site. But Voltage Valley was still my favorite, not just because they were Karen's arch-nemesis, but because their proposal included free EV charging stations for the entire street and a community power rebate for anyone within a quarter mile. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted to make Karen watch her own residents cheer for my success. When word got back to the HOA, and it did, quickly, the panic set in. I started seeing emails forwarded by sympathetic neighbors, filled with lines like, "This cannot be allowed," and "Is there a legal mechanism to stop him?" Karen even tried to play nice again. She sent me an email requesting a constructive dialogue and offering to explore a compromise that benefits both parties. Gloria's response? She sent her a one-line email, "We've explored enough." The best moment came a few days later when Karen tried to confront me in public. I was walking my dog when she pulled up beside me in her beige crossover, rolled down the window, and said, "Jack, please think about the community." I stopped, looked her square in the eye, and said, "I am. That's why I'm giving them better rates than you ever did." Then I smiled, whistled for the dog, and walked off like it was the final scene in a movie. But we weren't done yet. Because if I was going to go all the way, I needed a finale worthy of the chaos they created. I told Gloria I wanted to host an open auction. Invite all interested bidders, hold it on the property, and make it an event. She loved the idea. We sent out invites, notified the HOA of the auction date, and even put up a sign, "Future Site of Innovation, open bidding this Saturday." By now, the HOA was in full-blown meltdown. They sent a letter warning residents not to attend what they called an unauthorized commercial gathering. It backfired spectacularly. More people showed up just to see what the fuss was about. Vendors brought food trucks. Local media picked up the story. Someone live-streamed it under the tag HOA Havoc. It was like a block party mixed with a hostile takeover. And the crown jewel? Voltage Valley won the bid. They outbid the others not just with money, but with community perks, discounts, job opportunities, and a full redesign of the substation to make it sleek and silent. I signed the lease on the hood of Evan's SUV, handed him a fresh cup of lemonade, and toasted to new beginnings. Karen didn't show her face that day. But someone said they saw her watching from a parked car at the end of the street, seething behind her sunglasses. Good. Let her watch. The lights were on, the power was humming, and the future of Ridgewood had just shifted, because I refused to roll over when the HOA tried to play King of the Hill. Now I was the one on top. And I wasn't done yet. The auction had been a masterpiece of pettiness and planning, but the real fun began the day the eviction took place. I made sure to turn it into a community spectacle. I called it the eviction party and printed out flyers with mock invitations. Join us as we watch unauthorized equipment vacate the premises it never belonged on. I hired a local taco truck, set up some foldable chairs, and invited every neighbor who had ever rolled their eyes at the HOA. Within hours, my property looked like a family-friendly protest rally. Kids played cornhole near the fence, adults passed around lemonade and nachos, and someone brought a Bluetooth speaker blasting "Another One Bites the Dust" on loop. The irony was too good. Everyone was smiling, except, of course, for the two miserable electricians sent by the HOA's contractor to dismantle their precious substation. They showed up looking like they'd been sentenced to clean a crime scene. I greeted them kindly, offered them cold drinks, and handed them the official eviction papers with a cheerful welcome. Watching them haul out wires and transformers while half the neighborhood applauded was a memory I will carry until the day I die. It wasn't just that the HOA had been defeated, it was that they were being publicly defeated. All their secrecy, all their backdoor deals and paper-thin justifications, had crumbled under the weight of their arrogance. And now, for the grand finale, they had to admit defeat on the very ground they tried to steal. The substation came down piece by piece. Voltage Valley was kind enough to offer free temporary storage for the equipment until the HOA could figure out where to stick it next. I suggested Karen's backyard. No one laughed harder than Larry. After the wires were gone, the plot looked bare again, like a blank canvas. But this time, it wouldn't be the HOA holding the paintbrush. Over the next week, I worked with Evan and his team from Voltage Valley to finalize the new design. It wasn't just going to be a power site, it was going to be a symbol. A sleek, community-powered, HOA-free innovation hub with solar panels, battery backups, and yes, a small public access lawn with a fountain shaped like a middle finger if you looked at it from the right angle. We didn't say that officially, of course. We called it abstract wave art. Meanwhile, the HOA scrambled like ants in a kicked-over hill. Their newsletter went silent. Their violation patrols disappeared. And Karen? Well, she went from omnipresent to invisible. Rumor had it she was trying to rally the board behind a countersuit, but without evidence or public support, it fizzled out fast. The cherry on top came when a former board member, apparently sick of the whole mess, emailed me anonymously. Attached were files, meeting notes, internal messages, and most damning of all, a copy of the forged signature they had submitted to the county. The file name? JRD_approval_final_final2.pdf. That one document confirmed everything Gloria and I had suspected. The HOA had known the substation was being placed illegally. They just thought I'd be too passive, or too stupid, to stop them. Gloria nearly cried when she saw the file. "This is beyond civil now," she said. "This is criminal fraud." She handed everything over to the county legal office, who had already opened a quiet investigation into Ridgewood's operations. Once the forged permit was confirmed, things moved fast. Karen was removed from her position, the remaining board members either resigned or lawyered up, and a full financial audit was ordered. The very people who used to scold residents for painting their mailboxes the wrong shade of taupe were now under scrutiny for misuse of funds, illegal contracting, and document tampering. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip. People walked their dogs a little slower past my house, stopping to ask for updates like I was some kind of local news anchor. I didn't mind. I gave them the facts and a few tasteful jokes. One day I saw a kid riding his bike with a makeshift sign taped to the back that read, "Powered by Petty, courtesy of Jack." I made him a custom version using laminated cardstock. And then came the moment we'd all been waiting for. Voltage Valley broke ground on their new hub. They brought camera crews, handed out branded water bottles, and even let a few kids flip the ceremonial switch on a demo solar array. Local media showed up to cover what they called a David vs. HOA Goliath story. The article's headline the next day read, "From Trespass to Triumph: How One Man Sparked a Neighborhood Power Shift." Karen must have loved that. Somewhere, she was probably yelling at her cat while pouring expired rose. But the HOA's collapse didn't just free me, it freed everyone. With their leadership in ruins and their credibility obliterated, residents started questioning everything the board had done. Why were dues so high? Where did the landscaping budget go? Why did the community pool need repairs every summer but never got them? Questions turned into petitions. Petitions turned into meetings. And in less than 2 months, the Ridgewood HOA voted to dissolve itself entirely. The remaining funds were turned over to the county, who immediately redirected them toward actual infrastructure repairs. It was the best unintentional charity event I'd ever seen. Now, with the HOA out of the picture, the neighborhood felt lighter. People painted their doors whatever color they wanted. Someone installed pink flamingos in their yard just because they could. Larry threw a barbecue with zero regard for grill size restrictions. It was freedom. Glorious, spicy, slightly chaotic freedom. As for me, I wasn't done. I had one final move planned. You see, that empty lot was no longer just a symbol, it was a revenue stream. With the lease from Voltage Valley secured and the property value skyrocketing, I had leverage. Other businesses wanted in. A tech firm offered to sponsor a small kiosk to showcase renewable energy data. A local school wanted to set up a field trip program. I even got an offer from a startup that builds off-grid survival kits and wanted to host live demos. My once quiet backyard was now a hub of activity, and none of it needed HOA approval. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. Karen, now a private citizen stripped of her power, applied for a job as a community outreach coordinator with Voltage Valley. I found out because Evan texted me a photo of her resume. Should I even interview her? He asked. I told him to do what felt right, but include a tour of the property as part of the interview process. Let her walk the grounds and see exactly what her arrogance had built, not for her, but in spite of her. When the tour happened, I made sure to be casually mowing the lawn as she walked by. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her silence was the loudest apology I'd ever heard. and as she walked away, I looked over at the sign posted near the entrance, one that Evan had insisted we install. It read, "Community Energy Hub powered by progress, not permission." I think that said it all. The first time the new Voltage Valley hub lit up, it was just after sunset. I stood on my porch with a cold drink in hand and watched the soft glow spread across the lot like a sunrise in reverse. The sleek solar panels tilted automatically toward the fading sun, the wind turbine spun lazily above, and a modest electric hum filled the air, quiet, efficient, and nothing like the old eyesore the HOA dumped there without permission. The new system came online without a hitch, and within days, households near my property were already reporting lower energy bills. I wasn't just celebrating a personal victory anymore. This was a win the whole neighborhood could feel. The transformation wasn't just physical. It was cultural. Without the HOA looming over everyone's shoulders with measuring tapes and petty warnings, people had started to breathe again. Homes looked more personalized. Some had colorful door trims. Others had finally put up that swing set the board claimed was a visual hazard. Front yard conversations became more frequent, smiles more genuine. It was like watching a garden grow after years of drought. People weren't just coexisting now, they were actually being neighbors again. And Karen? She vanished for a while, at least from public view. The HOA's collapse had taken her with it like a captain sinking with her ship. There were whispers of lawsuits, maybe even criminal charges depending on how the county's investigation played out. But from what I heard, she was now consulting for another HOA a few towns over. Old habits die hard, I guess. Still, she'd been burned, and badly. Her reputation, once smugly polished and aggressively curated, was now radioactive. Even her allies on the board distanced themselves. One of them, a guy named Dennis who used to fine kids for sidewalk chalk art, emailed me personally to apologize. Said he never realized how far Karen had gone. I didn't respond. Some bridges don't deserve rebuilding. Meanwhile, Voltage Valley didn't just stop with infrastructure. They started programs. They offered internships for local high schoolers. They ran workshops on sustainable energy. They even helped sponsor a community garden on the edge of my property. I donated the space, not because I needed the goodwill, but because it felt right. The same land that had been illegally seized was now growing vegetables and teaching kids how to plant tomatoes. The irony was delicious. I can't deny there was a certain satisfaction in seeing how far things had come. There's a quiet kind of revenge that doesn't involve yelling or lawsuits, it's just living better than the people who tried to take you down. But I wasn't entirely done yet. There was one last message I wanted to send. Something permanent. Something unmistakable. So I commissioned a sign. Not a banner or a poster. A real, handcrafted, double-sided wooden sign with steel reinforcements and spotlights for nighttime display. On one side it read, "This land is private, protected, and proudly independent." On the other side, facing the old HOA office building, it simply said, "Powered by Petty." The delivery guys didn't even ask questions when they installed it. One of them just muttered "respect" under his breath as he tightened the bolts. That sign quickly became a local landmark. I even saw someone pose in front of it for prom photos. People began asking me to tell the whole story at town events and community panels. I kept it lighthearted, plenty of jokes, no self-righteous speeches. I told them the truth. I wasn't trying to become some neighborhood hero. I just didn't like bullies. And when bullies come wearing polos and board titles, they're still bullies. They just hide behind paperwork. The only difference is, when you fight them, you need more than guts. You need receipts, zoning maps, and one very aggressive lawyer who enjoys wine and vengeance in equal measure. Gloria, by the way, became somewhat of a local legend. She got so many referrals from my case that she ended up expanding her practice and starting a podcast called Know Your Land. I was her first guest. We laughed through the whole episode. At one point, she said, "Jack, when you called me about a substation in your backyard, I thought it was a prank. Now you've inspired half the county to read their deeds for fun. I told her, if this ends with fewer Karens and more raised garden beds, I'll die happy. There was one last twist to this saga, one that still makes me chuckle every time I think about it. A month after the hub opened, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten, stamped with no return address. Inside was a single note. No hard feelings. You did what you had to do. Respectfully, K. I stared at that for a long time. Part of me thought it was fake. A prank. But the handwriting matched. It was Karen's. Whether it was sincere or just an attempt at salvaging some shred of dignity, I'll never know. But I didn't need to respond. The land responded for me. The lights were still on. The turbines were spinning. And her old office was now just a quiet, empty building across the street from a thriving energy site she tried to control and failed. I didn't set out to start a movement. I just wanted my backyard back. But what happened instead was bigger, louder, and way more satisfying. I got justice. I got payback. And I turned a violation into a victory that couldn't be ignored. All because someone thought I wouldn't notice a giant metal box humming on my property like it belonged there. To anyone out there dealing with a power-hungry HOA or a Karen with too much time and too many bylaws, know this. You're not powerless. You just have to dig a little, stand your ground, and never underestimate how far a little stubbornness can go. Especially when you've got the law on your side and absolutely nothing to lose. These days, I still walk that lot every morning, coffee in hand. The grass is trimmed, the panels are gleaming, and the new sign catches the morning sun just right. Sometimes people stop to take a photo. Sometimes they honk and wave. And every so often, someone asks if it's true that a whole HOA got taken down because they tried to steal a patch of dirt. I smile, take a sip, and say, not just dirt. My dirt. And that, I think, says everything.